I was invited here to talk about co-founders. And co-founders are really one of the most important things about your startup. At the end of the day, it's usually the combination of people and an idea and sort of the market timing and the market's desire for that idea that these people are bringing into the world. And ultimately, if you screw up the co-founder thing, you probably screw up a lot of the other things as well. We're going to talk a little bit about co-founders. The context here is that we've seen a lot of co-founders be successful. We've seen quite a few more be unsuccessful through our time at ODF. Most companies, when they fail, don't fail because they haven't gotten a product that people love. That happens. But the thing that usually prevents it is the co-founders hating each other and getting into massive fights and arguments and just not being able to actually see eye to eye or align or actually make the progress that is necessary to be successful. So we're going to talk about co-founders and why that is, but I'm going to start off by talking about the main question, which kind of stems from that arguments and challenges type thing, which is, do you really want to work with this person for the next 5 years of your life? Do you want this to be the primary person that you spend most of your time with? It will probably be the person or persons that you spend more time with over the next few years. You really want to make sure that at that level, put aside the idea, put aside the success or failure of the business or the market or anything like that. Do you actually want to work with that type of person? Is it somebody that you just want to be friends with? I think it really, really matters. The thing that I like to say is that the ideas change. They change often, but the people, they never really change. So you really want to make sure that you are working with people that if they don't change, you're going to be really happy about that. And you're going to be happy with the way that they're sort of treating you and the way that they're acting and the way that they're treating customers, but also the way that they think and their work ethic. Now, I think that there are often a lot of avoidable mistakes associated with co-founders. And these are all things that I'm talking about that we have gone through as we built ODF. And ODF, for those of you who don't know, is a community and a program for people who are exploring starting companies. We've been at it for over 5 years. We've had over 1,000 companies launch. They've raised over $2 billion. And they've really gone and impacted all sorts of industries, ranging from consumer to fintech to healthcare, even extending the lifespans of dogs. And we're going to talk about some of the avoidable mistakes that come up when we see people try and co-found companies with folks. The first one is what I describe as a co-founder of convenience. A co-founder of convenience is this idea of you go out into the world and you find somebody because you're just looking for a co-founder. You're like, where can I find a co-founder? And you go out and you just find somebody who just happens to maybe kind of have some of the attributes that you need that might be a co-founder for you, but they're not by any means the optimal co-founder or anything like that. They are just, the co-founder that happens to be there, right? This is usually a major failing. You really want to make sure that you avoid co-founders of convenience because oftentimes you're just doing them because you feel like you need a Band-Aid or a duct tape on this. But really, you're going to come into all of the challenges that you associate with bad co-founder fit. Lack of alignment, lack of sort of personality match, lack of skill overlap and complements, right? So ultimately, you really want to try and make sure that you're not doing a co-founder of convenience situation. And ultimately, I think that one of the biggest challenges with the co-founder of convenience, and also just co-founders in general, is this misalignment of expectations. How often do you talk to someone who's a prospective co-founder and really get deep into the weeds about what it is that you're going to expect the desired outcome to be in the future? Would one of you be really excited if you got this company to, $1 million in recurring revenue and profitable? Would another of you really be disappointed if this wasn't a multi-billion-dollar company? You'd be surprised just how few people talk through the scenarios around what success looks like. And then also the scenarios around what failure looks like. Because ultimately, some people might be okay to work on something for many years before it actually takes off and has progress and actually seems to be a viable business. Other people might not be patient, or they might have financial commitments where they can only really commit for a short span of time before things start to take off. So you really want to make sure that you have this alignment of expectations. And if you don't, you really are going to run into a lot of challenges quite soon. And these are sometimes things that are really hard to reverse and rewind, because if you have a situation where, you're a year in, you've been trying to make this co-founder of convenience position work, or just somebody who you realize that you hadn't done the work to actually get the alignment of expectations with, you end up in a position where ultimately you might have had this person invest 20% of the company, something like that, before you realize and sort of like actually get to the truth of the matter, which is that you probably shouldn't have been working together in the first place. And you were just trying to make something work for a really long period of time. So you really want to make sure you align expectations. We can talk a little bit more about what that is. But I think the other thing that's really important to talk about is sort of this question of like, should you focus on your idea or should you focus on finding a co-founder? And I think it's really interesting because oftentimes when we meet people who are doing ODF, when they're exploring starting a company, we're interviewing them for our program, we'll ask them, how married are you to your idea? And even when people do our cohorts, you'll see sometimes that people act overly confident about their idea. And I think that they act overly confident sometimes, mostly because they're actually really hoping that overconfidence actually attracts people. But what they don't realize is that sometimes if you project overconfidence in an area where you don't actually have it, you're kind of doubly hurting yourself. One, you are kind of alienating people who are like, this person, this guy, this gal, they seem really awesome, but damn, they have an idea that they seem married to and it kind of sucks, right? So one, you're kind of alienating yourself from people. And then two, you're not seeing what else is out there because you feel like you need to project this aura of confidence. You're not actually potentially finding this amazing opportunity that could be right around the corner just based on a conversation that you have with somebody in ODF or a conversation that you have with somebody by some other circumstance. And that's really sad. So you really want to make sure that unless you are damn certain about this idea, and this is the idea you want to spend the next few years on, regardless of if you find a co-founder, that you project a little less confidence in the idea. And when you're talking to people about being co-founders, say, hey, here's an idea that I'm pretty stoked on. I think could be really good, but ultimately, I'm really trying to optimize for finding the right co-founder. And I realized that the idea that we start with today might not actually be the idea that we end up working with and having as a successful idea in the future. And there's so many success stories where the company looks nothing like it does today as a successful company when it started, right? I mean, Slack is a very good example, right? But ODF has a lot of examples of this as well. Some of our most successful companies looked almost nothing like they do today. Finch is building this incredible infrastructure for employment data, and they're just one of our fastest growing companies. But when they started out, they were actually building software to help fortune tellers. It had nothing to do with employment data or anything like that. They started with an idea, and part of the reason they started with an idea that was kind of a weird idea was just because they wanted to try working on something together. This idea of just working on something together instead of trying to agonize over what's the best something we could be working on is actually really valuable, because it's not as much about the idea as it is what it's like to work with that person on the idea. So if you're trying to find a co-founder, really try and figure out, hey, do I enjoy working with this person? And you actually realize that if you're working on an idea that you're not excited about, but you're still having fun because you enjoy working with the person, that's actually a really good sign, right? Because you might actually put a lot of sort of bad things to the side if you're working on something that you absolutely love. So it's almost better to try just some random idea with somebody early on to see how it works, with the acknowledgement that it can change. I think that another really big failure mode for people when it comes to getting co-founders, and this one happens all the time, I wonder if anybody else here has experienced this, is this idea of trying to convince somebody to be your co-founder. And there's really two aspects to this. There's convincing somebody to be your co-founder, and there's convincing somebody to be a co-founder in general, right? Convincing somebody to be your co-founder, if they're actively looking to start a company, then maybe that makes sense, right? Because, they have a lot of things that they're maybe considering in terms of partners and all of that. And you want to get a great person, maybe you should do something to try and convince them to be your partner, right? But here's the thing. If you try and convince somebody to co-found a company in general, and they're kind of on the fence. They're like, well, I don't know. I could continue to lead this department at Google, or I can, be a co-founder of a 2-person company, and you're actually weighing those two things against each other and trying to determine which is the right one for you. It's usually a bad sign. In fact, that example of somebody who's leading a department at Google versus deciding to be a co-founder and weighing those two things is a real conversation that I had with an ODF founder yesterday about one of their potential co-founders. I was like, look, let's just be real. They're probably not going to actually end up being your co-founder. And they said, yeah, they've already, extended sort of the deadline for their decision twice. It's fine. I'm not trying to throw shade at that person. You shouldn't feel bad or upset with that person for being indecisive or not wanting to co-found the company and not quit their amazing job that pays them lots of money. But you shouldn't hurt yourself in the process of trying to convince this person. You're going to spend a lot of time and a lot of cycles trying to convince them to leave their FANG job. And then you're also going to waste a lot of time because you're going to realize that their heart wasn't in it in the first place. When they actually quit their job, it's not usually going to last. So try not to convince people to leave their high-paying FANG jobs to be a co-founder. They should be able to sort of convince themselves of this. I like to talk about a few positive traits of co-founders or potential co-founders. So let me do that really quickly. But, I think that a couple of values around co-founders are really useful to think about. The first one is sort of openness to disagreeing. This is especially true when you don't know a person very well. If you know a person very well, you kind of understand how they might sort of articulate when they don't maybe agree or they're hesitant or something like that. But if you don't know a person very well and you're evaluating a co-founder with them, you really want to make sure that you're pushing towards disagreement and understanding when they disagree. If you don't, you're going to find yourself in a position where the person might seem like they're agreeing with you, but in actuality, they're not at all. And you're kind of like just letting this thing go and go and go. So a good sign is that people are open to disagreement. You're actually sort of encouraging that. Another one is just agency. Is this person somebody who's just going out there and sort of accomplishing things and kind of surprising you with what they are capable of doing? Resourcefulness is sort of adjacent to agency. This is a person who can kind of like figure out things in a way that maybe there's not a direct line to it, but you can sort of go around and accomplish the goal. And then I think the last one, which I think people tend to really kind of neglect, is inspirational. Do you want to work with somebody who actually inspires you to be a better person, who inspires you to level up, who inspires you to actually like work harder? If you don't have that person and that person actually causes you to work less hard, to feel demotivated, right? You want somebody who inspires you to do your best work, and hopefully you do the same for them. We're going to go back a little bit to this idea of how do you think about co-founders and finding a co-founder versus finding a co-founder to work on an idea. And I think that oftentimes people think that potential co-founders want you to have an idea. I think that this is sometimes true, but I think it's less true than people believe. And what do I mean by this? There's something to be said about finding the idea together. I think this is the thing that people really misunderstand about sort of like pitching yourself and your idea. I think generally, yes. I think this is good for the health of the company. And I think that generally speaking, if you're building a company, you should be thinking about the health of the company and whether or not it can sustain and be successful. So ultimately, imagine there was a world where we had zero vesting, right? You just sort of immediately own, a large chunk of the company. Well, then, the company could fail really, really badly. Let's just say something really horrible happens, right, to one of the co-founders. Not anything that like they weren't a fit or something like that. Life happens. And imagine something really terrible happens or something happens with a family member. Well, now that person understandably cannot work on the company anymore, but they own, or their family owns or something, 50% of this company. That's really bad because ultimately you don't want to kick that person off the cap table because something bad happened to them, right? But at the same time, you no longer have a viable business because so much of the equity is taken up by a person who's no longer at the company. So I think that a good way to frame this to people who are potential co-founders is like, look, this isn't about you leaving, right? This is about me leaving just as much. If you end up becoming the CEO one day, and I leave for some reason, maybe it's a reason like something happens with my health, right? I want to make sure that we're in a position that the company equity isn't taken up by people who aren't here and who aren't contributing anymore. But I expect that we're going to be working here together for the next decade, right? Also, you can have acceleration if there is an acquisition or something like that. So you don't have to worry about it from that perspective. The answer really depends. It depends on kind of what you want. And it also depends on the skill sets that you feel like you need to have as sort of like the most basic aspect of this team in order to be successful. A lot of skill sets can be hired, but usually you do want to have someone who's technical building a software product, for instance, right? So if you're not technical, there's got to be a really good reason for why you don't have a technical co-founder and you're building a software company, right? Another thing that's worth noting is that sometimes you might just start and build a company as a solo founder with the idea that maybe you will ultimately end up finding a co-founder, but you're not going to let that be an impediment to making early progress. This has a lot of benefits, right? The first benefit is you're not waiting around for a co-founder. You're making progress. You're getting customers. You're putting things out into the world. Well, when you do all of that, it makes you even more persuasive to attract a great co-founder. If you can do that and you can actually attract more great co-founders in the future, one person that I know in ODF had this really interesting framework. They're still a solo founder. They've raised a Series A. And they said, you know what? I've always been on the lookout for a co-founder, and I'm still open to it now, even though we're at Series A company. Only thing that's going to change here is what my bar is for a co-founder when I'm at Series A. And then, of course, there's some other people who are just amazing solo founders, and they've just sort of made peace with the idea that, hey, I could actually do a lot on my own. Being a solo founder actually provides some level of stability. And it's a worthwhile trade-off for me. And I'm also able to raise and hire and bring on other people that can sort of complement my skill set in other ways.